Students. There are many sources when diagnosing a student with dyslexia or any sort of language disorder. Next week, which is week 6, is going to be our interactive week, and I'll be discussing those with you. Be sure to read the 4 documents within the file before we have our interactive class. At least 70% of students who can't read by age 9 are never going to be able to catch up with their typically developing peers. This is so important to know because it stresses the need for early identification and early intervention. Poor readers are exposed to less text than readers who read well. Good readers may read 10 times more words than poor readers. That already sets them up for an amazing vocabulary that poor readers do not have. This is an example of a basic DIBELS oral reading fluency graph. Remember, DIBELS only measures accurately fluency. It gives a comprehension measure, but DAYS is really the comprehension measure that does some accuracy, not the oral reading fluency. So what this graph tells us is if there are 2 points at any point in time that are in red or below where the student is projected to be, an intervention needs to change. This intervention should have been changed right here. This intervention was changed and the student continued to go up. If there was a yellow, if there were 2 yellow or 2 red, you would want to look at the intervention and possibly change what the students are doing. So what is dyslexia? It's a learning disability that can hinder a person's ability to read, write, spell, and sometimes speak. It's the most common learning disability in children, and it does persist throughout their life. It accounts for 80% of people diagnosed with a learning disability, and the severity can be mild to severe. It's caused by an impairment in the brain's ability to translate images received from the eyes or ears into understandable language. These students have had an adequate opportunity to learn and have at least average intelligence, but are still not able to get reading despite traditional reading instruction. There are a lot of different characteristics. We're just going to do a few. Students with dyslexia have difficulty with word recognition, decoding words, spelling words. They can have poor reading fluency, comprehension. They may struggle with reading aloud. In preschool and kindergarten, if you see delays in talking, difficulty recognizing rhymes, recognizing letter names, or trouble remembering and following directions. In 1st through 3rd grade, they may have difficulty learning sound symbol correspondence, confusing visual and auditory letters, reading and spelling errors, lots of reversals. And again, reversals of letters are normal up to grade 2. After that, you really want the reversals to have ended. They may leave off endings in words or even in the middle of words. In grades 4 through 8, they have difficulty reading and spelling mostly multisyllable words. They lack awareness of word structure. Reading comprehension is low, and a lot of difficulties in writing based on spelling and problem solving or organizing ideas. You watched a video last week on dysgraphia. This is just a little bit about dyslexia. In high school and college, or as adults, they continue to have difficulty with word recognition. Reading is slower. Reading and comprehension can still be more difficult. They may struggle taking notes in class. Learning a new language may be a struggle. Remember, every student with dyslexia is an individual, and they do not all have the same signs, characteristics, and therefore a specific intervention is not always effective for every person. One thing we do know is extremely effective is developing phonemic awareness in children at a young age. Really, in a study comparing whole language and traditional reading instruction, children who began 1st grade high in phonemic awareness did well regardless of the kind of reading instruction they received. This is a little bit more about phonemic awareness and its value. These are some screening tools, and we'll talk more about that in our interactive class. I just wanted to list them out for you. As a teacher, you're not going to be diagnosing dyslexia, dysgraphia, or dyscalculia. However, you can assist parents in finding good places to do that. These are specific organizations who do that and will also help assist parents if it ends up being a speech and language processing delay or an auditory processing difficulty. They can kind of help parents weed out what's really going on. This is just a list of a few of my favorite books for adolescent literacy and assisting students who struggle at an older age with reading instruction. These are also some video examples of some of the best reading programs for students with dyslexia. All of these programs are Orton-Gillingham-based approaches. As you'll read in your text, for students beyond 4th grade, most of their reading materials have to do with textbooks or content areas. Here's the struggle with some of those. Social studies textbooks often do not use relational words between clauses, sentences, and paragraphs that would make explicit and logical relationships among ideas. So if you're going to be using your textbook with students with reading disabilities, you need to help students because they're not going to be able to infer those unstated relationships. There's also not a lot of sufficient details to help them understand the concept. So you might have to fill them in with some pictures, some graphic organizers, make sure their prior knowledge is fostered, attend to that vocabulary, help them connect the new vocabulary to previously learned vocabulary, continue to monitor their comprehension, and you could do that by having them graph their comprehension questions so that they can see growth. This is an example of a rewrite for a 5th grade student. The original text says, "Boatloads of tea were sent to America. Since it was cheaper than ever, the British thought that surely the colonists would buy tea now. They were wrong. Tea was burned. Tea was left to rot." The rewrite, "Since it was now cheaper than ever, the British thought that surely the colonists would buy tea. So they sent boatloads of it to the colonies. But because the tea still had a tax on it, the colonists were as angry as ever. To show their anger, the colonists burned some of the tea. They left some to rot." This allows for more details and more specifics so that they can connect it to their prior knowledge. In our math textbooks, the most difficulty comes in understanding and applying and analyzing word problems. Some difficulty in understanding and applying graphic illustrations, the ability to understand how the book is structured, to use the text to become independent learners in respect to mathematics, to comprehend and apply data. So what is most helpful for these learners is to offer information within the real world context. Take those story problems and immediately apply them to something that they are currently going through or currently know about. Give them explicit and repeated instructions on the language of math. Help them understand what sum means, what the specific vocabulary is, so that they can really focus on the information. In science textbooks, the areas of the most concern seem to be science reports because of their complexity, their length, the writing component. The science text, often the math literacy confuses them, the tables and charts, so helping them to make sense of what the table and chart is showing them. The vocabulary in the science book and the syntax, and then also taxonomies. Because of the conceptual relationship, they need to be shown exactly how these specific things relate to one another. This is an example of a high school biology book and what would be required. Often our students just make a guess. They don't even read the beginning, and if they read the beginning, they sometimes don't know what it's asking them to do. So you may need to assist with the directions and understanding what the question is asking, because the visuals tend to be easier for students with reading disabilities. So what makes an effective reading program for adolescents? We know direct and explicit comprehension instruction is important. You can't just teach fluency. Comprehension is the more important strategy. If they don't become fluent, if they can even do 100 words per minute, that is great. Then focus on comprehension. They also need effective instruction on content. What is going to be said in this book? Metacognition. How do I learn best? How am I going to assist myself in learning? They need motivation and self-directed learning, which you'll learn in Universal Design for Learning, how to help them with that. They need text-based collaborative learning. What that means is, yes, they need to have a book, but they also need you to make those adaptations for them. They need some tutoring from you or a fellow student, and they need diverse texts. They're not going to be able to learn everything from the textbook. You're going to have to supplement some reading. That is at their instructional level. They're going to need intensive writing components. The writing component helps the brain make that graphic motor connection, which in turn puts the new information into long-term memory. We talked a little bit about assistive technology. That's going to be important. Continuing to do formative assessments and summative assessments are important. Providing the teachers that are working with these students with professional development and ongoing assistance in that professional development on a comprehensive and coordinated literacy program that is effective. Here is an example of a few of those programs. In adolescence, a lot of the problem behavior is caused by a lack of self-esteem or the skills needed to feel confident in reading. This is a quote that I often read to teachers. High-quality academic instruction, content matched to the student's success level, frequent opportunities to respond, and frequent feedback by itself can reduce problem behavior in all schools. So it's important to remember that there's a reason for the problem behavior and to assist them in developing coping skills that they can use for the rest of their lives. In Chapter 16, you'll learn about instruction on older students with word level of reading disabilities. An assistive technology worth checking out for students above 4th grade is called Reading 3D, and it's both an iPad app and a computer program. I want to make sure to draw your attention to a few things. Be sure to look at page 496, the digraph sounds, how to gradually introduce more and more phonemes into words, working with students on root words, prefixes, suffixes, flashcards to teach meaning, graphic organizers. Silent reading does not work for those who struggle reading. The National Reading Panel suggests that sustained silent reading does not demonstrate benefits with students who have not yet developed the critical alphabetic and word reading skills. So be sure to look at page 508 through 509 on some successful classroom practices that do work. Advanced organizers, doing read alouds and think alouds, and assessments are key. Formative assessments are there to help you as you're instructing a student to determine if they're ready for that instructional level. Summative assessments are given at the end of instruction to determine if they learned what you taught. Both of these must be present in your lesson that you'll be uploading to TaskStream. The formative assessment is, are they ready for the instruction I'm giving them at this moment? Summative, did they learn what I taught them? Your book covered MTSS and RTI well, so I'm just going to recommend that you, when you're looking at students, ensure that you start at the bottom and look at the environment, what around them could be changed to assist them in instruction. Then look at the curriculum, the instruction, and at the end look at the learner. We need to teach students the different kinds of context clues. One of those is a direct explanation clue. In this, the definition or description of the word is right there in the context. Experience clue is when the author assumes that the reader has had a certain experience and can draw from that experience to help them understand the word. Words in a series is a context clue in which, based on the words around the word that is unknown, students will be able to figure out the category that the word fits into. In a restatement context clue, the author actually repeats or clarifies what has been stated previously. Contrast and comparison clues, the author will usually have words such as but, and, or therefore that show similarities or differences in a known word and an unknown word. And finally, we have inference clues, in which the writer embeds the word in a sentence or a series of sentences that lend clues to the word's meaning. Each of these I've given an example below, but I'm not going to read those to you. In your notes, I have the top 10 reasons why you should present words in context for students with reading disabilities. Enough time to finish on visual literacy. Visual literacy is the ability to interpret, negotiate, and make meaning from information presented in an image or picture. Visual literacy is extremely important for adolescents and beyond because visual texts are often complex and multi-layered. Visual texts communicate certain information clearer than verbal texts do. Visual texts are used widely in our electronic media nowadays, and visual literacy is a lifelong skill. It's important that we teach visual literacy to help them draw information from visuals that they're given. Visual literacy often comes natural to us as students as early as 1 or 2 can identify the McDonald's sign. Here is an example of all the different products and different things that we normally use visual literacy for. I don't have time to run through it with you, but I wanted to make sure you knew it was there. Graphjam.com is a great site for visual literacy. These are just some of the fun graphs that I use to teach students visual literacy because they care about the content and it's interesting. I highly recommend going to Graphjam for some of these. Double entries journals is a great way to teach visual literacy. You can use a cartoon, you can have students put what they think based on what the picture says, you can have them agree or disagree. You can use OI charts, which is observation and then what they infer based on the observation. But visual literacy and wordless picture books can be a great method.